Hello, friends. Today I'll be reading I Survived the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, chapters 3, 4, and 5. Oscar stared out the window in shock as the train pulled into the city. Chicago was called the Queen of the West, but what an ugly queen. All along the tracks were factories and warehouses. The sky was smudged dirty brown from coal fires and dark clouds burping out of smoke stacks. Soon enough, they were off the train and standing in the enormous station hall. Every other person smiled and waved at Mr. Morrow. "Charlie," a man boomed. "Welcome back, Mr. Morrow," said a porter lugging a heavy suitcase. "Mr. Morrow, I loved your latest pictures," a pretty woman gushed. "Good to be back," Mr. Morrow beamed. People swarmed around the station, more people than Oscar had seen in all his life. Everyone was rushing around as if they were late for church. And suddenly Oscar noticed the rotten stench that filled the air. He had never smelled anything as disgusting. It was like someone had tossed 100 skunks into a hot outhouse and left them for a month. Oscar could see from Mama's crinkled up nose that she noticed it too. "The slaughterhouses," Mr. Morrow said, reading the sickened impressions. "They butcher more hogs in Chicago than anywhere in the world." Mr. Morrow went to the baggage room and returned with their 3 suitcases. Oscar's was the smallest. Inside was all that was left from his life on the farm. His few clothes and his prized possession, Papa's sheriff badge, a 5-pointed silver star. "If there's somewhere I can freshen up?" Mama asked, smoothing one of the gold curls that popped out of her bun. "I'll show you," Mr. Morrow said, taking Mama's arm. "Oscar, can you help keep an eye on the bags?" Oscar nodded. But as they disappeared into the crowd, Oscar's heart thumped. He felt so out of place here, and strangely, all alone. A bunch of rough-looking boys lurked around. One of them stared at Oscar. He had a bright red hair and strange yellow-tinged eyes that reminded Oscar of rattlesnakes. Oscar was relieved when they drifted away. He took a deep breath and looked around, thinking about Papa's one visit to Chicago. Papa was just 20 years old at the time. His parents had both died, and Papa had decided to leave his hometown near Boston and head west. "I was looking for my fortune," Papa always said. He landed in a no-name town in Dakota Territory. The town was desperate for a sheriff, and Papa needed a job. For months the place was quiet until the night a gang of outlaws rode in. Their leader was Earless Max Kildare. Actually, Earless did have one ear, Papa had explained to Oscar. He lost the left one blowing up a safe during a bank robbery. Papa heard that Earless Kildare was a killer. And sure enough, by morning the town's bank had been robbed, and one of Papa's friends was sprawled out dead in the street. Earless and his gang were long gone. Papa went after the gangster, chasing all the way to Chicago. He finally found them in a stinking tavern near the river. Papa pulled out his gun, ready to arrest them, but Earless was too quick. He jumped behind the bar and started shooting. Pow! A bullet whizzed just past Papa's head. Pow! Papa fired back but missed. Earless lunged forward with a final shot. Pow! The bullet hit Papa in the chest. It should have torn a hole right through Papa's heart, but it ricocheted off his badge instead, leaving a big dent smack dab in the center. Earless escaped in the commotion. After that, Papa decided he was done chasing outlaws. He had heard about the free farmland up for grabs in Minnesota. He had never farmed, but figured he'd give it a try. He ended up in a little town called Castle, where the first person he met was a freckle-faced school teacher with the prettiest blue eyes Papa had ever seen, Mama. Within the month, they were married. By the next year, they had the farm and Oscar. So I found my fortune, Papa liked to say, kissing Mama on the cheek. As for Earless, he was lying on the loose. Papa heard he was in Chicago, lying low, but still up to no good. Oscar's thoughts of Papa were cut short by a whispering voice. "Can you help me?" He looked down at a skinny little girl with a yellow cap over two raggedy braids. She stared up at him with big brown eyes. "I've lost my parents." She was so helpless. "Well, we'll find them," Oscar said, standing a little taller. "I think they went this way," she said, leading him by the arm out of the main waiting room. But then suddenly she let go of his sleeve. "Sorry," she said, and then poof, she disappeared into the crowd. An uneasy feeling grabbed hold of Oscar. Something wasn't right. He spun around and rushed back to the suitcases. They were gone. Chapter 4. 30 minutes later, 9 p.m. Illinois Central Train Depot. "Those street kids are vicious," the policeman said. He looked down at Oscar. "Son, you're lucky you didn't get stabbed." Mama, Mr. Morrow, and Oscar stood with the policeman on the spot where their suitcases had been. The cop, Officer Brennan, was an old buddy of Mr. Morrow's. He explained that Oscar had been tricked. The little girl wasn't really lost. She was a crook, part of a band of thieves. She distracted you so the others could steal the suitcases. Officer Brennan said, "Happens here every day." Officer Brennan and 3 older cops had already scoured the station, but there was no sign of the girl, or the bags, or the rough boys Oscar had seen. Oscar told the policeman about them too, including the red-headed boy with the strange eyes. "Otis Weber," the cop said, his friendly eyes narrowing. "He's only 14 years old, but he's got the heart of a killer. We hear he works for an older guy. They take helpless orphans and turn them into ruthless criminals." Oscar shuddered. "Will you find her suitcases?" Mama said. "Doubtful, ma'am," he said, giving them all an apologetic smile before he left. Mr. Morrow put his arm around Oscar's shoulders. "I should have warned you," he said. "In a big city like this, there are some bad characters." "What's done is done," Mama said, shaking the worry from her face. "We can all get new clothes. What matters is that we're all here together." Mr. Morrow beamed at Mama. Oscar ducked out from Mr. Morrow's arm. Oscar didn't care about his clothes. All he cared about was Papa's badge, which was gone forever. It was past 10 p.m. when they finally got out of the station and into a cab, a beat-up buggy pulled by a dusty horse. The cab driver flashed a smile filled with black teeth when he saw Mr. Morrow. "Charlie!" he cried. "Welcome back." Was there anyone in Chicago who didn't know Mr. Morrow? "Hello, Joseph," Mr. Morrow said, patting the man on the shoulder. "Take us to Palmer House, please." Joseph let out a sharp whistle. "Fancy!" "We'll have supper there," Mr. Morrow told Mama and Oscar. "Then we'll head home." "Oscar, I think you're going to like the house. My father built it. It's a little far away from things, north of our new park. The best room is my studio. You can look out the windows and see all of Chicago." Oscar managed a nod, bit his tongue. Mr. Morrow's house would never be home. Home was Papa's farm, where the air didn't smell like dead hogs, where the only thieves were the rabbits that stole carrots from the garden. The horse clattered away from the train tracks and warehouses onto a wide avenue of grand buildings. Oscar tried not to act like he was impressed, but the buildings were taller than any tree he'd ever climbed. Amazing, isn't it? Mr. Morrow said, smiling proudly. When I was born, this city was just a little town on a marsh. Today, Chicago is one of the most important cities in the world. It's beautiful, Mama said. But suddenly, Mama's expressions darkened. Does the sky look odd to you? She asked, her brow wrinkling with worry. Oscar saw it too, a pale orange glow in the sky. Must be a fire, Joseph said matter-of-factly. We're having fires practically every night now. Hasn't rained here in months. The city is bone dry. The word fire sent a flash of fear across Mama's face, and it jolted Oscar too. 3 years ago, a massive forest fire had erupted in the woods north of Castle. It burned thousands of acres of pine and birch trees, and then raced across the prairie towards Castle. Dozens of buildings were burned, including Oscar's barn. The entire town could have been lost. But just as flames were lapping at the edges of Main Street, a big rainstorm blew in and dozed the fire. Don't worry, Mr. Morrow said, giving Mama a reassuring pat. Chicago has one of the best fire departments in the country. We have close to 200 firemen and a fleet of the best new steam pumpers. That fire will be out before we finish supper. The cab lurched to a stop, and Joseph turned around, and here we are, folks. Palmer House Hotel, finest in the city. They climbed out of the cab, and a man in a top hat swung open the hotel's huge front door. Oscar peered inside at the glittering lobby. Bright lights twinkled, and piano music filled the air. Oscar lingered outside. He'd never seen such a fancy place, and he was sure he didn't belong in there. Oscar glanced back at the street, tempted to bolt away to the train station. And that's when he saw her, a little girl scurrying down the sidewalk. Even in the flickering gaslight, there was no mistaking that dirty yellow cap, those raggedy braids. There she is, Oscar called out, but Mama and Morrow were already starting across the lobby, and Oscar's shouts were drowned by the music and the hum of the chattering crowd. The girl moved quickly across the sidewalk, and before he even realized what he was doing, Oscar had dashed into the street. He had to catch that little thief. Chapter 5, 10:15 p.m., heading toward the south side. Oscar dodged a speeding horse wagon and leaped over a steaming pile of manure. He hopped onto the wooden sidewalk and wove his way through the crowd, his eyes glued to the yellow cap bobbing in front of him. The little girl didn't look like much of a criminal, with her stick legs and flapping braids, but wasn't that innocent look part of her act? Papa always said that Earless was a charmer. He'll dazzle you with his smile and then shoot you dead, Papa would say. Plus, Papa explained, Earless treated the guys in his gang like brothers. He made sure that they ate and drank like kings. Oscar figured the girl was heading for the gang's hideout. His best bet was to secretly follow her there. Oscar stayed hidden as he followed her through the busy streets. They crossed behind a tavern and then cut through a snaking alley. They finally came out onto a dark street of small houses and shacks. The girl leaned for a sagging little house set back from the street. Oscar ducked behind a barrel and waited as she used a key to open the front door. Bruno, she called out as she went inside. I'm back. Bruno must be one of those thugs, Oscar thought. He saw a piece of jagged wood lying on the ground. He grabbed it. It would make a decent weapon, just in case. He crept up to the house, crouching low so none of the criminals would spot him out the window. He wondered what he should do, barge in and demand his suitcases. Suddenly his knees started to shake. Sweat oozed down his neck. What was he doing? He needed to get out of there. But then he thought of Papa facing the gun barrel of earless Max later. No, Oscar thought. He wasn't going to run scared from a bunch of street thugs. He was going to get Papa's badge back. He curled his fingers around his weapon as he rose up, ready for a fight. Oscar peered through the window. He spotted the little thief. As his mouth dropped open in shock, no, he thought, it can't be. He imagined her sitting there with Otis Weber and the other boys, rummaging through piles of loot. He'd gotten it wrong. They were no thugs, no sign of his suitcases. The girl sat in a little wooden chair. On her lap was not a pile of stolen money and jewels, but a smiling little boy with a mop of dark curls. Oscar guessed he was maybe 3 years old. Their voices floated through the open window. "Sorry I have to leave you alone again," she said. "I'm very brave, Jenny," the boy said, puffing out his chest. His little croaking voice made Oscar think of the baby frogs he used to catch behind his house. "Next time I help." "No," the girl said. "It's no fun what I do, and you need to stay here and guard our house." The boy puffed out his chest proudly. "I guard. And guess what? I have enough money to get us some nice fresh milk tomorrow." "And a cookie?" the boy asked hopefully. "We'll see," she said, taking off her yellow cap. Suddenly looked older than Oscar had first thought, maybe 9 or 10. The boy reached up and tenderly smoothed one of the girl's crooked braids. "I love cookies, Jenny," the boy whispered. "I know you do, Bruni," Jenny said. She smiled, but it was a weary kind of smile, tinged with sadness, and remembered Oscar of Mama's smile, how she looked in the months before Mr. Morrow appeared. Oscar swallowed hard as he stepped away from the window. Those kids were on their own. Oscar felt it in his bones. He remembered what the policeman said. Otis Weber preyed on the most helpless orphans. Oscar dropped his stupid weapon and headed slowly towards the road. What a dope he was, pretending he was like Papa chasing a killer outlaw through Chicago. Instead, he found 2 sad little kids. And now all he could think of was Mama. How could he have left her like that? She must be going crazy with worry. His mind was so jumbled up that he barely noticed when something landed on top of his head. It felt like a leaf or a big moth. He absentmindedly brushed it away, then was startled when a shower of sparks spilled down in front of his face. A few hit his skin, burning his flesh like little hot needles. Oscar looked up and saw a sight so strange he was sure his eyes were playing tricks. It looked as if glowing red snowflakes were falling from the sky. They danced in the gusting wind, hundreds of hot burning embers of different sizes and shapes. Before he knew what was happening, they were all around him, attacking like a swarm of fiery bees. They seared his scalp, burning through the wool of his clothes, scorched his lips, pain lashed him, and the sickening smell of his burning hair made him gag. And suddenly, whoosh! Flames leaped up in front of Oscar's face. The sparks had ignited his clothes. Oscar was on fire.